So in the context of the independence referendum, where have I come from? I was born in a council house in Oakland, the youngest of a family of 4. Although I didn't know it the day I was born, obviously, my MP was Communist Willie Gallagher back then. My dad was a miner for 51 years, and my mum, who was originally a domestic servant, later worked in Peter and Baldwin's and other. I grew up in a mining village. I listened to my dad's first-hand knowledge of coal owners. I heard his stories of the 26th strike. He was just a boy who was a bit of a singer to raise money for the local soup kitchen. He told me about the achievements of the post-war Labour government that included the National Health Service, the National Coal Board, the Scottish Special Housing Association, and many, many more. From my mum, I also learned a lot about the class society reflected in her role as a domestic servant. Upstairs and downstairs wasn't a TV series for me, it was part of my family history. I grew up in a community that created the miners' welfare. That in turn delivered the pipe band, the football team, the bowling club, the library, and so much more that gave me a solid moral foundation in my life and a strong sense of community. As a young adult, I recall watching Willie Hamilton. He was the MP that followed Willie Gallagher. He was telling them, he was explaining that if you stuck up a monkey with a red rosette and a Labour ticket, you would get elected in West Fife. It would maybe be childish to say that Willie proved his point, but some have said he did. So of course I became a Labour supporter, not out of blind loyalty, but out of an understanding that Labour's track record at that time were key foundations of a more equal and more fair society, some of which I referred to earlier. Some years later, between the general elections in 1974, I joined and got more involved in the Labour Party, and that was when I first ran across Dennis and a lot of other socialists with whom I had common cause. Back then, the Labour Party was the place for socialists. Back then. Recently, I watched the BBC Parliament channel run its coverage of the general election in February 1974. Included in that look back at our political history was an interview with William Grove, who at that time was the leader of the SNP. And I'm quoting him, he said, "We want independence, then we will talk about the kind of Scotland we want." For me, that was a classic pig in a poke. It certainly didn't stand the surveying test, and was one of the many reasons that I joined the Labour Party shortly after that first election. Back then, there was a Labour vision of society aiming for equality, social justice and opportunity, opposed to nuclear weapons and resistant to American overtures to join the Vietnam adventure. That suited me. So for my surveying test, that's where I came from, so that's my first question answered. But over the ensuing years, a lot of stuff has changed. Although at the extreme, and I refer of course to Thatcher's version of Toryism, there was a discernible difference between Labour and Tory. Gradually and inexorably over the years, the two have become, as far as I'm concerned, almost indistinguishable. So while the people of Scotland voted increasingly for the left alternative, we get Tory governments we hadn't elected. And even when we got Labour governments, they came with illegal wars, privatisation, nuclear weapons, and increasing inequality in society. That doesn't suit me. I don't know if Dennis will recall this, but I remember as members of Labour's Scottish Executive Committee, Dennis and I sat in a working group on poverty. That was chaired by a young Gordon Brown. Mind you, we were all a bit younger in 1981. The working group was invited by the Law Society of Scotland to submit evidence to its consultation on a proposal to end bindings, what we know as warrant sales. For those of you too young to remember this was an amazing arrangement, a horrible arrangement, where working class families with small debts would have sheriff's officers descend upon their home, sell off their furniture and belongings to rapacious buyers for a fraction of their value to repay the banker or the money lender. Dennis and I, and a comrade from Cain, who became a very good friend to me, voted for the proposal to end these arrangements, but we were in a minority in Gordon's working party. Gordon, who couldn't bring himself to support an end to that kind of savage treatment to poor people, went on to become the Labour Chancellor and leader who appears to have had absolutely no difficulty bankrolling the illegal war in Libya, did I say? Iraq, and the bailout of the failed capitalists running their banks into the ground. That is exactly where the socialist post-war Labour Party has now arrived. Very different place. So now we're faced with the United Voice of London-based parties telling us what's good for us and just how bad independence will be. It has been labelled Project Fear, and we've heard references to Cameron jetting in and Scare Force 1, which all seem quite appropriate to me. Let me throw in another wee bit of history triggered by Project Fear. I went into a second-hand bookshop in Beverley in Yorkshire in 1983 and I bought a pile of books. I think some old communist that Hull had died, and I managed to come here to these books. One of those books was a small book written by an Aaron Bevan called In Place of Fear. In that book, he's a man, of course, as you know, who's credited with the delivery of the National Health Service and that government I referred to earlier. In his book, he wrote, "It is a dangerous period in the lifetime of a nation when the convictions, beliefs and values of one epoch are seen to be losing their vitality. Those whose habits and possessions are bound up with the vanishing social order are filled with pessimism. For me, that pretty much describes better together, whose income and interests are tied to today's vanishing social order." Bevan seems to have anticipated very well the political reality that has settled in the United Kingdom in recent years. Because he also wrote, "A nation too long suspended between alternative courses of action is in a sorry plight. It is even worse when we can discern little difference between the parties seeking our suffrage." I would suggest that that's a pretty good description of where we are today. We've got three London political parties, Tory, Labour and Lib Dem, all looking exactly the same, all pessimistic, all bound up with self-interest in the status quo, and none of them offering a vision of the kind of society that I want to see. I never thought I would see Labour feeding the Daily Mirror line on immigration to seek to hold on to votes that might go to UKIP and Westminster marginals, but that is exactly where the focus of the UK parties is these days. Better Together is fond of pointing out uncertainty on any grounds that they can come up with. But just how certain has life been in the UK in recent years or even further afield? For instance, you think Alistair Darling saw the banking crisis coming? Of course he did. Those who now demand certainty have no track record in delivering it or even delivering what they promised. For my overriding questions, what sort of society do I want to live in? I'll come to that in a minute. On who do I trust to deliver it? The answer is none of the aforementioned. I do not trust any of the London-based UK parties to deliver the kind of society that I would like to live in. So for my surveying test, I've told you where I came from, I've now told you where I am. So I have a wee look forward to the destination that I would like to arrive at. I want a society that's fair, one that gives opportunity to people on an equal basis. Most of all, a nation that lives in peace with its neighbour, and a community that values freedom and human rights. And just as a wee bonus, I would really like to have a government that I voted for. So that is what is, the question is that more likely to be achieved with independence or as part of the UK? Let me for a minute turn the referendum question on its head. Imagine that we're now living in the independent Scotland defining the government's white paper, and you're being invited to vote whether or not to join the union. Would you sign up for austerity Britain, even more cuts in spending, jobs and services coming down the line, and that's regardless of which of the Labour parties continues after the next election? I don't think so. Would you vote for a union in which you were governed with people that you didn't elect? I doubt it very much. Would you vote for a union in which 20% of our children live in poverty? I can't imagine you would go with that. Would you support the introduction of prescription charges and tuition fees? Doubt it. And would you vote for a union in which the only growth industry is food banks? That's beyond my imagination. And who in their right mind would vote for the obscenity of parking nuclear weapons a few miles to a major centre of population? Not me, and I don't think you would either. So if you wouldn't vote to join that union that I have described, I challenge anybody to dispute my description. Why on earth would you vote to stay within that union? In September, we have a wonderful opportunity to map out a different future. From a very selfish point of view, this will be the only chance that I'll get. However, while I would urge you to take that once in my lifetime chance, I'm not going to ask you to do it for me, do it for yourself. I don't believe that anybody can with any integrity offer guarantees of milk and honey, but one thing we can do is take our future into our hands. For half of my life, Scotland has been governed by parties the Scottish people rejected. 91% of the current batch of Scottish MPs said no to the bedroom tax, and we got the bedroom tax. 80% of Scottish MPs said no to privatisation of Royal Mail, to absolutely no avail. The 81% of Scottish MPs who said no to public sector pension changes were drowned out by the Tories. Only one of them, and I use the word loosely, represents a Scottish constituency. So despite the ability to bail out bankers and cut top tax rates, Westminster MPs of all parties, including the Labour MP for this constituency, to his eternal shame, trooped hand in hand into the lobby to vote to cap payments to the poorest people that you and I know. It might be together, but it's certainly better. Then, of course, we have had the promise of further devolution from the London parties. They're queuing up to outbid each other. These are the same parties who opposed, just in case you've forgotten, any suggestion of DO Max on the ballot paper, and they now expect us to believe that's really what they meant all along. I'm not persuaded. Just over 100 years ago, a trade unionist called Joe Hill was active in America, and he wrote a song, "You'll get pie in the sky when you die." Better Together seemed to have resurrected the lyric and missed out on the irony. And you will note that there is absolutely no clarity, no certainty from the people who demand certainty in all things of what is on offer. Indeed, there appear to be three different offers. There's the Ming Campbell Liberal one, I don't know, we've produced the Labour one, and we've been promised the Tory one any day soon. So we cannot know if the pie in the sky is better than clearly together. We get three different versions. So if I thought there was a pig in the poke in 1974, that poke is full of pigs now. One less clear than the other. A yes vote lets us do it our way. We may make mistakes, we will make mistakes, but we'll do our mistakes. That's how we address the long-standing democratic deficit of government after government that we rejected. Much is said about the economy, and in relation to Scotland's economic position, I am, for one, absolutely relaxed. I have always been. I never saw it as a particularly significant issue. Scotland's ranked 8th by the OECD in terms of GDP. We are not poor. But take a look around the world. There are many independent countries whose economies are far weaker than ours, and I don't see any of them. I don't know if Crimea is an exception to that, but I don't see any of them offering to sell their independence to the highest bidder. Last year, I had the pleasure of visiting Cuba as a lifetime ambition. I would recommend it, by the way. Wonderful people, fabulous climate, there's not a lot of money, and there's a very fragile economy. I made a point of talking and listening to people. If I can bore you on another occasion, I'll tell you the most fabulous mugging that I ever had in my life, where I was mugged by an attractive woman for an hour and a half, who cheated me at about 20 pesos on the price of my cigars, but took the trouble to show me a museum, take me to a friend's bar, and show me how to make cocktails. It's a fabulous country. But I spoke to people, and the taxi driver that brought me back to my hotel one night, he was telling me he wasn't happy with everything in Cuba. He was a law graduate who was driving a taxi because he couldn't get a job as a lawyer. I can't imagine that the pay would be terribly different anyway, but he was obviously frustrated. but he was fiercely proud of the independence of his country and the fact that they had achieved it by their own hand, albeit in very different circumstances to us. So there's no pastoral roles in those nations. Another question that people keep throwing up from the Scare Force camp is the one of currency. Osborne Balls and Company say they will refuse to allow us to continue to use our pound. I would just refer to the Irish experience. For 40 years after a war with Britain, Ireland continued to use the pound without any apparent difficulty and moved on in due course to use the euro. So if a country that had been at war with Britain can carry on that way, I see absolutely no difficulty in a friendly neighbour doing exactly the same. And I pose the question, are Scottish Labour and Lib Dem MPs seriously proposing to attempt to undermine the Scottish economy after the yes vote? In my view, that would require a degree of backbone and principle not previously apparent. I go back to my first question, what sort of society do I want to live in? I want one that is more fair and more equal than the one I live in today. I want a government that reflects the social priorities that the people in our society have voted for. I want to see our resources, and they are vast, I want to see them directed to addressing poverty, education, unemployment, and not nuclear weapons. I want to live in peace and not a constant state of war in some far-flung part of the globe. I repeat what I said earlier, there are no guarantees in an independent Scotland. But it will be up to us, and in September we will have the opportunity to build the sort of society that I aspire to. Joanne Lamont may believe what she said in STV, just let me remind you what that was. We are not genetically programmed in Scotland to make political decisions. She may speak for Labour, she may even have been only speaking for herself, but she's no way she spoke for me, and I can't imagine she spoke for many people in this room or indeed across Scotland. I am dying to make the biggest political decision of my life, and that's exactly what I intend to do on the 18th of September. When that day comes, I will vote yes, and I urge every one of you to join with me. Yes to take the power to shape our future, yes for a fairer society, and yes for our independence.